People getting up quite early, I think, in Germany to be here. Thank you. Albuquerque, wonderful. Nadine, welcome from Wollongong. Very good. So we're also streaming live on YouTube, and we have Punsiri who says hello. I'm not sure where Punsiri is from. Michael says Sao Paulo from Brazil. Wonderful. Very good. So there's still some more people coming in from the waiting room. Good to see you all. Mike from New Zealand, one of our big fans of the Therigatha Festival. Thank you for being here. I wonder if any of those people who are joining us have a favourite Terry or a favourite Therigatha poem they want to share whilst we're waiting for other people to come in. There's still some more people coming, so just give it a few more moments and then we'll get started. Very good. So my respects to the Mahasangha who's joining us tonight, and to all of the participants and viewers. Thank you so much for being here for this, the finale for the Therigatha Festival, this Finding Sanctuary panel discussion. My name's Bhante Akaliko. I'm here in Sydney, Australia, together with my good friend Ayya Vimalanyani. I'm one of the organisers of the Therigatha Festival. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today and to thank you for your enthusiasm and interest in the festival and for participating in this exciting, inspirational 2-week festival full of fantastic poems by enlightened nuns from the time of the Buddha. Before we get too far into this session, I want to begin with an acknowledgement. So many people here today from all around the world, from many different parts of the world, many different time zones, some people getting up very early, some people staying up late. Thank you for being here. But in Australia, we always begin our formal sessions with an acknowledgement of country. This is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet. So today I'm coming to you from Varamadagal land of the Darug people. So I want to acknowledge that these people have had a long custodianship of this land, and to acknowledge that this land was never ceded. This will always be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to extend that respect to all First Nations people all around the world, and to acknowledge the importance of First Nations people in all our cultures. And thinking of today's discussion, I'd like to acknowledge the important place of women in Aboriginal culture, especially the important place Aboriginal women have in transmitting spirituality and spiritual teachings to the next generation. Thinking of how fortunate we are to have access to the Therigatha, the world's oldest collection of women's literature, and how fortunate we are today to have a lineage that goes all the way back to the time of the Buddha, all the way down to us today, where we can hear spiritual teachings, enlightened teachings, full of wisdom, full of power and strength of women's spirituality, and to have so many fantastic women, spiritual practitioners, here with us today. So the festival now has been running for 2 weeks. This is the grand finale. And I thought it was a good idea perhaps to just recap the program that we've had. So over the past 2 weeks, we've had chats, poetry readings, interviews, Dharma talks with a variety of practitioners from all around the world. We've had members of the Fourfold Sangha. We've had the Bhikkhunis talking about these ancient Bhikkhuni verses. We had the Bhikkhus talking about it. We've had our lay women and also lay men talking about these poems. And one of the reasons that we decided to make this festival was to inspire a new generation, inspire people to check out these poems and to let people know that these poems exist and that they're full of wisdom and full of power, and that we can learn from this wisdom from these ancient women. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of hits on YouTube. Videos have been viewed so many times, lots of positive comments and lots of enthusiasm for this series. We've had talks by senior monastics such as Bhante Sujato, Ayya Tataloka, and one of my favorites that kicked off the festival was a talk by Ayya Kusuma. And she's in her 90s now, I believe, which is a remarkable achievement. We also had Ayya Sudama giving an interview with Ayya Vimalanyani and some other talks. We had a panel of monks discussing the poems and learning from the wisdom of Bhikkhunis. We also had a very interesting talk by Dr. Malai O, who gave us an insight into a forgotten Bhikkhuni, as well as a panel discussion by Rainbow LGBTQIA+ Buddhist community. So congratulations to everyone involved in this festival, which has allowed so many people to access these poems who might never have heard of them before. And today, I'm very pleased to be here with some inspiring people who have shared the Dhamma throughout the past 13 days in the Finding Sanctuaries Finding Sanctuary series, which was hosted by the festival co-organiser Ayya Vimalanyani. So I'd like to begin by introducing these panelists to you today, by introducing their biographies, which you can also find on the Therigatha Festival website. So I'll just go through each of the panelists one by one to let you know a little bit about them, and then we'll get started with the discussion. So Ayya Vimalanyani is a German Bhikkhuni who's currently living in a small hermitage in Sri Lanka. She has an interest in the early Buddhist texts and the lifestyles of the nuns from the time of the Buddha. She researches and translates sutras and texts on monastic discipline from ancient Chinese to English. And she is also an artist, and under her pseudonym is an illustrator named Venerable Yodha. And Ayya Vimalanyani's drawings, what you see as our Therigatha Festival branding. Thank you so much, Ayya, for all your hard work and for also being the host for the Finding Sanctuary series. 13 episodes, fantastic. We also have joining us today, Ayya Yeshe. Ayya Yeshe is the Abbess of the Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery in Tasmania. This is a non-sectarian, female-led Buddhist monastery. She is also the director of Bodhicitta Foundation, a socially engaged Buddhist charity empowering ex-untouchable Buddhists in India. She's a teacher, a published author, and also a YouTube celebrity. You can find her YouTube chanting of songs, which has hundreds and thousands of views on YouTube. Also joining us today is Ayya Munisara. Ayya Munisara is a Thai national who was born in Thailand and raised mainly in the Philippines. She is a Harvard graduate and a scholar in Southeast Asian Studies, a degree she gained from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. She took seminary ordination in 2009 at Nirodharan Bhikkhuni Arama in Chiang Mai, and she took her Bhikkhuni ordination in 2012 at Dhammasara Monastery in Perth. And that's where she currently resides. Thank you so much for joining us, Ayya Munisara. We also have Ayya Soma joining us from Empty Cloud Monastery. Empty Cloud Monastery, of course, did, I think, 3 live streams just recently for Therigatha Festival. And Ayya Soma is the co-founder of Buddhist Insights, a non-profit organization that connects people with monastics. So it's great to have you here today, Ayya Soma. Thank you so much for joining us. And we also have Anagarika Sabamita. Anagarika Sabamita first encountered Buddhism in her 20s and became interested in early Buddhism after discovering the sutras. She's working on German translations of the sutras, which is an extraordinary thing. And she took her Anagarika precepts in 2017. And our last guest, and please forgive me, I'm afraid you're down the bottom of my list and I don't know why, should have been at the top. Ayya Sudama, welcome. Thank you for being here. Ayya Sudama was previously an attorney, so I hope I don't get in trouble for almost leaving you out. She received ordination from Bhante Gunaratana at the Bhavana Society and higher ordination in Sri Lanka in 2003. She is the abbot of Charlotte Buddhist Vihara in her hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina. I think that's right. So thank you so much to all of our guests for joining us. For those people who are watching today, please put your questions for our venerable guests into the chat so that we can ask them the hard questions, find out a little bit more about the Terries, and find out something about contemporary practice for all of us to learn from. I do have some questions to start off, and I want to share something from Ms. Will H, who left a comment on our YouTube channel. And this is one of the many positive comments left. And I just want to share it with you. It's quite beautiful. She says, "Thank you so much for this series. First thing I do when I wake up in the morning is to check the latest episode and listen to it whilst having breakfast. These verses are like hidden gems, and your discussion on them helps understand the metaphysical meaning, which is inspiring. I really wish that this series continues even after the festival time period. Thank you so much again, and much merits to all who helped on this project." So that's a great example, I think, of someone who's discovered these poems and who's really benefited from the festival. Another person, Padma, wrote, "Thank you for this inspiring series, bringing the words of the Terries to life. It's good to hear from both the women practicing at the time of the Buddha and also women followers today." And so this is something that really came to light throughout the festival, was that this was a conversation between contemporary women renunciants and the renunciants of the ancient past. So I'd like to ask our panelists, and I open up to all of the panelists, how did it feel for you having this conversation with women from the ancient past, these enlightened Bhikkhunis? How did it feel for you as a contemporary spiritual practitioner to have access to these ancient teachings? Sure, everyone's going to be a bit reticent to start. If you'd like to jump in, you can raise your hand, or I can nominate you. Ayya Yeshe, first up. Here we go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So 21 years ago, when I became a nun, somebody put a copy of the Therigatha in my hands at the Buddhist library. And they said, I think you'll be interested in this. And I opened it up, and it was like a time capsule for women. And the amazing thing was that these nuns were facing the same kind of patriarchal nonsense that I was still 2,600 years later. They were still grappling with the issues of women everywhere. And they were also, you know, showing a light of hope that women can become awakened. So I found that so inspirational and still so relevant, you know, and it's so wonderful that we have these voices of women today, which are really not that different to women in the present time.
Thank you, Ayya. Ayya Vimalanyani, you spent a lot of time thinking about these verses, talking with other practitioners and studying these verses. How was it for you having this conversation with the past? What spoke to you most about these poems?
Yes, actually, I've been reading those poems for a long time. Even before I ordained, I already knew about the text, and I was so inspired. And then for many, many years, actually, I've been thinking that we should really have a festival about the Therigatha. So this was something that I've been thinking about a long time. And especially in the Theravada tradition, our Bhikkhuni Sangha is quite young. We don't have many very senior, very experienced leaders in the female Sangha. So I think it's quite natural that we look to the ancient texts and to the ancient Bhikkhunis for guidance and to be inspired and, you know, to see the potential of the female Sangha, because our own Sangha is still so young. So, I mean, it's such a huge inspiration to know that, you know, the women were there and, you know, the lineage is there. And yeah, that, you know, people were there before us and they did it. And so we also can do it to, I mean, gain full enlightenment and, you know, walk on the path. And they encountered many obstacles, but they didn't give up. So, I mean, we are having exactly the same kind of obstacles now. And yeah, so gives us hope to, you know, to keep on going. And also because also one other reason why I wanted to do this festival is because nowadays there's like in the public discourse, there's a lot of like negativity being discussed about women in Buddhism, and is there discrimination and opposition to the female Sangha, and there's always this negativity, and we're always like fighting an uphill battle, like trying to legitimize our existence, and always like there's just all the discourse about women in Buddhism is always kind of negative. So I really wanted to have something positive, something inspiring, just a celebration of the women and all the contributions that they've made. So I think the festival really achieved that purpose, and lots of people came together, and it was really a big celebration. So I'm actually really, really very happy how it turned out in the end.
And so you should be venerable. Fantastic job. We've got some questions coming in from some of our viewers. There's some tough questions here. So that's thanks to Bindu. Bindu's got 3 questions on the screen. I think we should maybe start with the 3rd question, which is about the origins of Bhikkhuni monastics and travel. One of the things that became clear from the festival was that the life that we see of the nuns is a little bit different from the life that we have come to expect from Bhikkhunis. And so this question has particularly to do with travel. Not being able to travel and stay a single night outside a monastery without being in the company of another Bhikkhuni. And we have examples in the Therigatha, such as Bada Kundalakesa, where she doesn't seem to have another Bhikkhuni with her. Another thing that came out from some of the poems with discussions from the Finding Sanctuary series was that the nuns were staying alone in the forest and meditating in the forest. So maybe we can ask Venerable Munisara about this. Why is it that this rule perhaps came to be, that the nuns had to be spending the night together and not alone in the forest? And yet we see in the early practice of the Sangha, the female Sangha, that the nuns spent a lot of time in solitude and on their own. Are you able to speak to that, Venerable? If you are, just unmute your microphone. Perhaps I know that Ayya Vimalanyani has also got a lot of knowledge around this, so perhaps she can help out too.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I haven't, done a close study of the Therigatha to really track how many cases there were of people who were meditating alone or traveling alone and that kind of thing. So I'm no expert on that part of the aspect, but yeah, it's one of those rules that gets talked about so much for bhikkhunis, the rule, the Sanghadisesa rule about not traveling alone. And there's so many viewpoints out there. But I feel like I don't really want to turn the reading of the poems into a sort of a legal kind of a research, I feel like the power of the poems is more in their content. So maybe I'm not the best person to speak on this, but yeah, it is worth noting sort of as anecdotal, circumstantial evidence that yes, there seem to be many cases in the poems of bhikkhunis who are in the forest by themselves or traveling by themselves. But it's one of those things where, because I was a history major, I feel like history is always just this nebulous, amorphous story that we try to turn into fact. But history is never something we can actually pin down. So yeah, maybe I'll speak more on other questions. Maybe someone who has much deeper knowledge about the legal aspects or the Vinaya aspects of this collection of poems can speak more to this. So you can suggest somebody, Bhante.
Sure, of course. We've got such learned venerables here, and also in Sabamita, you talked about Bada Kundalakase's poem as well. So you might have looked at this. So Venerable Ayya Sudama or Ayya Soma or Sabamita, please feel free to speak to this. The discrepancy between the solitude and forest practice of past and the Vinaya as it came down to us today.
Okay, for me, this is actually part of the power of these poems, that they show that these nuns were living the way they lived back then. So, I mean, in theory, there are several possibilities why this was so. Maybe the rule was understood in a different way in the early times, or it was not yet in existence. So we don't know, and it will be difficult perhaps to find that out, or maybe research is only just starting about these things. Right now, there is not a clear track how this came into being. But for me, it is part of the power of the Therigatha poems to see how these nuns lived and how independent they were compared to what is expected from nuns today.
Thank you. And I think I saw Ayya Sudama, you're about to speak to that as well.
Thanks. I was feeling quite strange because I couldn't see myself on the screen. I realized I just have to switch the screen to see the other half of the panelists. All right, very good. So yeah, I mean, a shallow, easy answer would be that all of those occasions of women being so free happened before the rule was set down. I mean, that would be one explanation. I I personally don't find that satisfactory. It's just, I think it's just too pervasive and too lacking in the post-rule examples. When I became a Bhikkhuni, the Bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka explained to me that the travel rule was intended in the context of the deep forest of ancient India in between villages. It was truly extremely dangerous for a woman to go from one village to another through deep forest on these paths alone. So that would not apply to getting on an airplane. I mean, I can't imagine a safer place than an American airport for for a woman in terms of gender. So I think that as long as you're not getting into the woods, into a dangerous situation, that it would not be the kind of thing that would be applicable for people today. I mean, it's not the same conditions that were being addressed. So I had another point about that, and I just it just left my mind.
It's okay. There's still plenty of questions, and so there's a.
I'm sorry. I thought of the other part. I believe the rule actually specified Andana woods, so I don't know exactly how it applies to the whole world. So that is another thing to consider.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that. So another question from Bindu, which might generate some energetic discussion, is addressed to Ayya Soma. And Ayya Soma says, this is the question from Bindu. The female body has been appropriated since time immemorial. So it's wonderful to see a reclamation. And she's asking, for the record, shirt or no shirt with the robes for female monastics? Why the controversy? And what does the Vinaya say? So, historical fashion. What were the Therigatha, what were the Theris wearing, I wonder? And are you able to speak to that, Ayya Soma?
Thank you, Bhante, for, well, first of all, inviting me today. And thank you to Ayya Vimalanyani for organizing this beautiful festival. Well, it seems like, I think, my outfit from today is a sort of visual answer to the question. But it's really interesting to me how when one follows the Vinaya, it's actually controversial. So how the Buddha was, so ahead of his time, even, in 2021, whatever year we are here in the United States of America, where I currently am. And we think that due to all the technology that we have, due to all the work that has been done in society for social rights, that we're such an advanced society, so much more advanced than ancient India 2,500 years ago. Yet, apparently, we're still way behind the Buddha. So yeah, so Buddhism is actually the only religion that I'm aware of that has the same outfit for male and women. So it comes directly from the Buddha, right there, as we can see. Very similar. The only thing that female monastics have extra is a little Buddhist that goes underneath it, and a bathing cloth. So that's what the Vinaya, that's what I'm aware of, has for female monastics. Now the extra, little garment that sometimes is used, both actually by bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, is usually used in the West, because right now it's quite warm here in New Jersey, but in the fall and the winter it gets a little bit colder. So we need some extra layers in order not to freeze. And then, of course, in Mahayana, we see the development of monastics going to China and, well, first encountering a different type of climate, similarly to us in the West, where this robe can be not terribly practical in the winter, but also a different culture and different expectations. So it was interesting for me to, for example, travel in Thailand and go to different temples and see, you know, some signs that were very familiar to me, being born and raised in Italy. So whenever you go to churches, but in particular the Vatican, actually, you'll see the big signs with what is appropriate to wear in church and what is not appropriate to wear in church. And it's usually a lot of female sort of signs, skirts like this, skirts like that, tank tops, etc. And then occasionally the sort of male kind of figurine there. And I was, you know, I'm sorry, so you see these signs and then you see the artwork, and the artwork is very much reflective of the signs. When I was traveling in Thailand, I would see the same signs, but then I would turn around and see these ancient representations of both monastics and lay people. And it wasn't really matching the instructions up there. You would see actually female monastics, well, wearing this, the classical dress, and female lay people wearing hardly anything at all, just a little perhaps strip. You go at Wat Po, that's the female garment. Pretty much anywhere that you would see lay people represented that was not the last century, the outfit was very, you know, somewhat different. And we ran, you know, Buddhist Insights had a retreat center pre the pandemic for 5 years in Rockaway Beach in New York City, and we never had a dress code. And the reason we never had a dress code was because we were trying so hard to find in the suttas some instructions from the Buddha of how lay people were supposed to, you know, dress. And we didn't cater to one particular Asian sort of Buddhist population. So we had people from Thailand, people from China, people from Sri Lanka, people from Japan, all over the place. And so some people had certain ideas of what, you know, was supposed to be the modest outfit for women, which was entirely different from the expectation of Chinese people, for example, which was very different from the expectation of Sri Lankan people. Were like, okay, so what is actually appropriate? What is even modesty? So in the suttas, once again, the only thing that I could find was the Buddha inviting us monastics to restrain the mind whenever we see people not wearing clothing. He never said, hey, lay people are supposed to wear this or this other outfit. So when one starts researching history, we see the profound impacts of colonization in Asia, and how actually when you know, Portuguese people, for example, or British people went to Sri Lanka, they were horrified that women would go around topless, actually, in the country. And even more so with very skimpy clothes within temples, within spiritual sort of places. So there has been a slow indoctrination, especially in the past century, on what is appropriate to wear. So it's an import, you know, that you know, that's not traditional. There is no sense of that this body, the female body, is you know, supposed to be covered. It's all tropical countries, so it's pretty hot there. You don't want too many different things. So my understanding is that in Buddhist ancient culture, there was no relation to the body being this thing that needs to be covered, but rather that's an import of puritanical and Abrahamic sort of concepts and ideas. that unfortunately colonization put there. So it's really coming from my original culture. So from Italy, so the Vatican that I was trying to escape from, you know, you can never escape anything in samsara. So I was trying to escape that in my culture, and there you go. I found it imported in Buddhism, but I'm not really interested in practicing Christianity. I'm interested in practicing Buddhism. So I'm interested in practicing the Vinayas laid out by the Buddha. So yeah, I think we should all like commit to the values of the Dhamma Vinaya.
And I wonder if this is one of those particular issues where there's going to be a variety of views, and that people in different places are going to have very different attitude towards this because of cultural reasons, traditional reasons, all sorts of other reasons, and how that might fit into perhaps colonial thought, post-colonial thought, anti-colonial thought, all of these kinds of things, as well as, I guess, more traditional ideas about modesty that even if they're quite new in cultures, might still have some powerful effect. And in addition, if it's easy for Western monastics, white Western monastics, to talk about these issues, and much more difficult or much more confronting for people who come from traditional Buddhist backgrounds. I don't know if Ayya Vimalanyani, if you have any further things that you want to add to this discussion.
Thank you, Bhante Akariko, and thank you, Ayya Soma, for explaining this in so much detail. I don't have that much to ask, to add, just to reiterate, definitely from the point of view of Vinaya, since it was asked, what does the Vinaya say from the point of view of Vinaya? This is the correct way of dressing. It's much harder to argue why a long sleeve shirt should be okay. You can still argue it's still okay, but it's much harder to argue why that should be okay than just, you know, doing the original thing, doing what the Buddha said, and just wearing the original robes. And I mean, this is a shoulder. It's not a private part. We can see the monks' shoulders all the time. There's no problem with a shoulder. So there's a lot of like people making like a mountain out of a molehill, basically, because like, there's nothing inherently problematic with a shoulder. And it's very interesting that Ayya Soma mentioned all the paintings and the artwork from traditional Buddhist cultures. And we didn't plan this at all, but it so happened that I actually prepared a few of those images so we can see the traditional artwork from Sri Lanka and also from Thailand, where they depict Bhikkhunis from the last few centuries. And we can see it's always in the traditional dress. So I'm going to try and share my screen and show a few of those images. So hopefully you can see this now. This is an image from Sri Lanka, from the Kelaniya Vihara, and this shows Sangamitha Theory. Sangamitha is a very, very famous Bhikkhuni. She brought the Bodhi tree to Sri Lanka. And when she arrives in Sri Lanka, we can see her arm is uncovered, even though this drawing was made in the 1930s by a Sri Lankan artist in Sri Lanka in a famous Sri Lankan temple. And nobody had any problem with it at that time. It was meant to inspire people. It wasn't meant to confront people or to cause any scene or any problem. This is just how people thought that Bhikkhunis should look like at that time. And this is from a temple in Thailand. I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong. Wat Tepti Darang. This is about 100 years older than the picture we just saw. This is statues of Bhikkhunis. They have a whole hall of statues of Bhikkhunis, and all the Bhikkhunis are not wearing anything on their arms. They're all sleeveless. Here we can see it even better, that the Bhikkhunis aren't wearing any shirts. This is also, again, how Thai people traditionally depicted Bhikkhunis, how they imagined that they should look like. This is also from Thailand, Wat Po, also from the 1830s. Here we see the Buddha teaching the monks the nuns and the laymen and the laywomen. And I have a close-up of the nuns. Here we can see the nuns. Clearly, they are not covering their arms. Here's another picture, nuns teaching male and female lay followers, again, with the arms and shoulders uncovered. This is Bhikkhuni Dhammadina teaching a laywoman. And here again, we have Sangamitha, Sangamitha Theory coming to Sri Lanka. She's here with her 2 companion bhikkhunis. Actually, there were 5 bhikkhunis, but 2 of them are not in the painting. And we can clearly see that they are wearing the traditional dress. So as we can see, this is, as Ayya Soma mentioned already, the traditional way of dressing for bhikkhunis has always been like this, and only in modern times we are making a big problem out of nothing, really.
So I wonder if this is something that you could spend many, many hours talking about, perhaps, and it would be really interesting to hear the different points of view from people in different cultures and different traditions, and maybe different backgrounds, and perhaps even different ages as well. There might be some different viewpoints on this. It's quite interesting. One thing that I noticed is that no one thinks that I'm scandalizing the Sangha if I appear with a shoulder exposed. But for some reason, when we talk about women and women's bodies, it's always like a scandal or, question of morality. So it's something quite interesting to consider, just the harshness in which women's bodies are judged. So one of the things that I really enjoyed thinking about that came up from the discussions was the importance of these poems representing positive role models for contemporary women practitioners. And Ayya Vimalanyani, this is something that you talked about a little bit. And I'd like to ask you and any of the other venerables here just how significant it is for us that we have access to these poems and what it means for contemporary practitioners, not only women, but also men, to know that there were enlightened nuns and that we have access to their poems and their wisdom today. Why is it important to have female role models? And what can we learn from that? Ayya Vimalanyani.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay. Yeah, this is something that I really noticed when I was living in Thailand, and there's just so many pictures in the monasteries, especially forest monasteries. When you go, it's like there's always lines and lines of pictures of the great Kruba Ajahns, the great forest masters, who people say are enlightened. And the strange thing is I didn't even notice that something was amiss until I started to want to practice more seriously and thinking of ordaining. When I started to notice, like, hang on, like, how come there's there's very little visual representation of any female practitioners, and or even knowledge of them, partly because maybe there were fewer, frankly, because there wasn't the opportunity to be supported to live a full monastic life. But it really hit me when I remember I was looking at this book. I was at a forest monastery, and there was this book about relics. Everybody has different ideas about relics, but anyway, if you believe that relics is some sign that someone is enlightened, that was the first time I actually saw relics of the theories from the time of the Buddha. Like, you always see relics of modern Kruba Ajahns here, there, everywhere. You see pictures, but this first time I saw relics of you know, like the famous Bhikkhunis we see depicted in the suttas. And it was just such a striking moment, because for me it seemed like, well, this is like visual representation of something real, like they really existed, like these are their relics and this is like physical evidence, if you believe that. But anyway, the thing is that made these people not just storybook characters. Like even when you read about them in the Therigatha and you read about them in the suttas, they're kind of like storybook characters where you kind of know that they exist, but they don't seem real. But the thing is, like Ayya Vimalanyani mentioned, in Theravada, we don't have many examples of living enlightened nuns. so we don't have that access to spiritual role models that you can actually see yourself in. It's different. I mean, monks are, of course, you know, very inspiring if they've gone very far on the path. Very inspiring, but there's something that you just can't see yourself in them. They don't look like you. I mean, they do kind of, especially if you're wearing, you know, if you're not wearing a jacket, if you're a nun, then they look pretty much like you. But the thing is, they don't really look like you, and you know that, and you feel that. They don't really feel like you too when you talk to them. They feel different. And so there's part of you that never quite believes that you too can be enlightened, that you too are material for the ultimate, you know, end of the goal kind of thing. This is subliminal. This is not theoretical. Intellectually, you know that, oh yes, of course, regardless of gender, we all have the same mind and we all can be enlightened, blah, blah, blah. We know this at the theoretical level. But at an irrational, emotional, subliminal level, unless we have access to some kind of role model that is real to us, there is part of us that doesn't quite believe that. And so that's a real spanner in the works if you kind of go for enlightenment, you don't actually believe you can do it. It's a real spanner in the works. But the thing about the Therigatha is that even though at some level they do remain a bit storybook, because you can't see these people, you can't meet them, you can't actually be in their physical presence, you can still hear a very vivid voice, a voice that feels very human, sounds very real, and sounds like real wisdom. When the verses reflect teachings, they sound very authentic. And so this is kind of the best we can do. You know, this is the best we can do in terms of enlightened role models. I don't know, I mean, there are supposedly, you know, in Thailand, female practitioners, perhaps machis, who have been enlightened, and you might have the good fortune to meet them, but they're often quietly tucked away into some quiet corner of the country, and you don't really know where they are, and you don't really have access to them as real people. So in terms of having an enlightened spiritual role model, the Therigatha is sort of like kind of the best you can do as a contemporary Theravada nun. And so it's pretty good, you know. I mean, in lieu of actual living, breathing role models, this does seed you with some kind of confidence in your own ability to practice the path to the end, but also to learn from the wisdom that remains, thanks to the redactors, remains accessible to us. And these are timeless struggles that they have been through, which, you know, is very comforting when you can see that, oh, okay, these people, they struggle too and they made it. It's something that makes you feel like, right. So this is something that in the modern times, there's no reason why we couldn't also practice the full enlightenment. So I think it's something that you'll never really know the power of something until you know it's not there, you know? So for you, Bhante, you know, as a monk, you probably don't know what it feels like to not have like a living spiritual role model. I don't think you'll ever know what that feels like. But the other nuns in this panel, and also maybe the women listening, we know what it feels like. So reading the Therigatha from this kind of mind, it has even more power and more inspirational value. So, you know, I can't really overestimate, I think, the power of having an inspiring role model to really give you that confidence in the path and the confidence in yourself. So that's something that I find very valuable about being able to read and learn from these verses. So that's probably enough for me. Somebody else, please share.
Yeah,
as well.
thank you for that. I think this is an important point. So I'd love to invite our other panelists to respond. It seems like such a powerful thing to have female role models. And I think Ayya Yeshe might have something to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this Therigatha shows the Buddha was so progressive, you know, that he saw women as human beings with awakened potential and gave them that opportunity to ordain. But also the Therigatha shows us, you know, the humanity of these people, that like there was older women who'd been abandoned by their children, who felt lonely, who sought a way out of suffering. There was a woman who was so depressed by her inability to get enlightened, she was ready to commit suicide. She had her head through a noose. There was somebody who'd, you know, loved a man who betrayed her and tried to kill her. And these were people who lived difficult lives and still managed to get enlightened despite all of those things. Which I think is really encouraging for all of us, you know, because they're not just a saint in gold who never made a mistake. They're deeply human people with deeply human lives, with human problems, who still manage to find freedom from those problems, which for me makes it so interesting and inspiring, because they were human, they weren't perfect. And they finally undid that knot, and that shows that all of us can do it. But it also shows that, you know, the basic humanity of everybody, that the stories of these women, the stories they dealt with, weren't that different to men, the kind of inner struggles, but, you know, they just had this other level of oppression imposed by patriarchy, in the sense that they had to deal with the gender that was imposed upon them and the restrictions of that gender. You know, and one of the nuns talks about being tied to the kitchen and the mortar and pestle and her husband's expectations. And, you know, and there was another nun being sexually harassed by this guy. So she's like, you think my eyes are so beautiful, let me pop them out of my head and take them, you know. So there was her Me Too moment, you know. So these are like you know, all of these issues women are still dealing with today. And, you know, about the robe issue, I just think that men's desire is men's problem. So let's stop making women pay the price for men's desire, and keep, if you feel desire, it's your problem. It's not to be played out, you know, in the honor of women's bodies or by controlling women's bodies, you know. Anyway, that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Would any of our panelists like to continue this theme of the importance of female role models? I think I see Ayya Soma with her hand up.
Thank you, Venerables, for sharing your perspective. What came to mind to me, it's interesting because when I entered the Buddhist world, I feel like I entered, even though there was so much talk of non-self, there's a lot of talk of gender. And I realized that I actually, contrarily perhaps to the experience of a lot of women who, like Venerable Munisa was sharing, will have this sort of automatic identification or looking for role models of the same gender. It never had even crossed my mind. So I remember as a practitioner, someone gave me the, similarly to Ayya Yeshe, like the book, the Therigatha, and I was like, I'm saying, oh, you are definitely going to be interested in this. And I was like, not really. Like, I put it on the shelf because I was not really interested in poetry. It was not necessarily that it was female monastics or male monastics. It hadn't even crossed my mind. So when I was looking also to become a monastic myself, I actually felt that I had lots of role models. Similarly, I also don't feel perhaps maybe Ayya Yeshe can relate more to that, since she has different perhaps robes or different tradition. Even though I'm wearing Theravada robes, I have actually a lot of respect, and I look up a lot to all the Mahayana Bhikshunis as well. Some of the most inspiring practitioners actually are that have motivated me to ironically take Theravada robes rather than the other robes, but are from the Tibetan and Chinese tradition, both female and male. But anyway, what I wanted to share was actually the other way around, when people are getting you a little bit more aware of the fact that you have this body, and that this body means something in terms of your abilities for awakening. Especially when I put robes on, I was presented with certain ideas like women have less, even though they can attain awakening, they have less chances to do so because we have our periods once a month, or because there is a lot of different hormonal imbalances in the body. And then what else? I've been told so many different things. I've also been told that it's bad karma to become a woman. And I was quite shocked because it actually came not from men, but from other women. And so there was this sort of questioning of, for the first time in my life, in anything that I've ever done, first of all, the realization that I actually had this body, and that this body meant something for a lot of people, that perhaps the people that I was looking up to, actually I was, looking up to people that weren't people that I should be identifying with. So the idea that there is actually a lack of representation. But also the question of, are these sayings, are they based in reality? Are they true? Am I actually hindered due to my body in the attainment of awakening? It was a lot of suffering actually for me to have this realization of gender. And actually that's when, ironically, my investigation started happening with the Therigatha, and how I was very happy to find these stories of women who had this body and who were treated in a particular way, and how this body was not an obstacle for them. Their gendered experience wasn't an obstacle for them. And it was no different than any obstacles that actually any human experiences. It's just a particular flavor of obstacle. So it's important to find a representation of the first disciples of the Buddha, where they're dealing, as Ayya Yeshe was saying, with the same exact issues that we are today. So I was actually named after Bhikkhuni Soma, so one of the Arhats, because actually reading her, I read it first in the Samyutta Nikaya. So when I read, Maya coming up to her and telling her all those things, which basically were being told to me as well, like, you can't really attain awakening, you don't have that much of a shot due to your little wisdom because you have a female body. And she's basically turning around to Mara and was like, talk to my hand. What does this body have anything to do at all when the mind is concentrated well, when we can develop the path and see right and through Dhamma? And yeah, it filled my heart with faith, with Sagda. So it is very important to have these words, to understand that whenever we hear the opposite, it's actually Mara speaking. It's not the Buddha, it's not the tradition that we have endorsed, it's not what we are here practicing with, it's not what we put the robes on. And so it is important that then, in order to transcend, we need to transcend any type of identity that we have. But sometimes, actually not sometimes, in order to transcend the self, we need to understand what that self means to begin with. And it's important to really investigate it. So it's been actually very, very beneficial for me to, I'm still in the process of doing it, reading the experience of other women, seeing how they attained awakening, investigate what does it mean having a female body. What does it mean to identify as a woman if one identifies as a woman or doesn't identify as a woman, or doesn't identify as a male or a female necessarily, but has a female body? What does that mean? What does identity mean also for other people? How other people are identifying us and how that produces suffering. And so we see that all the different Bhikkhunis are talking about that. But in an enlightened way rather than, an unenlightened way like I am right now. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to share that perspective to other people, imposing certain ideas on us.
Very much. And Sangamitha or Venerable Sudama, do you have anything to add to this idea? I think I saw Ayya Sudama looking animated there.
You did, but Sister Sangamitha has been rather quiet. I don't want to take a space when she'd finally gotten an opportunity to speak if she has something to say.
Please go ahead and I will speak afterwards.
All right, then. I just want to give some background context that so many people may not expect. When I was new at the Bhavana Society, I was cleaning up the office and I went through some correspondence and I found the death threats that Bhante Gunaratana got the first time he ordained a woman. 4, 5, 6 typewritten letters, it was back then for typewritten letters. In the early 90s, he dared to put a lay woman into novice monk robes and he actually got death threats. This is a background energy, a background dynamic that should not be just overlooked and dismissed and ignored. When you mess with people's religion, there can be some very strong pushback. Just like when some tourist climbed all over a Buddha statue to get a picture, people are outraged and they get arrested. When a woman put on a robe, some people just want them arrested. And that's not all that long ago that my ordination sister, Satravadi, was thrown in jail in Burma for daring to wear this robe. So there is this there's an intensity underneath this. My higher ordination was only 10 years or so after those death threats were being sent to Bhante Gunaratana. And mind you, no one said to me, death threats happen. I just happened to stumble across them. Was it even something considered worth talking about? It's just how it was. So we pioneers have walked a very thin line because there are kind of expectations, demands on us on one side to be progressive and all this, and demands and expectations on the other side. You better not be messing with our religion. Like you have to follow, you have to toe the line. I personally, and my fellow pioneers, sister pioneers, to the extent I've noticed, have taken an extremely conservative tact in order to open the doors. I have followed those Garadama rules to the T. Well, mostly, at least certainly at first, because I'm opening the doors. I figured give it 20, 30 years and we can have more of what the Buddha did. I didn't expect to see the shoulders bared so soon, but I expected it. I wanted to see that freedom in the younger nuns eventually. I didn't expect to see flying cars become a possibility in my lifetime. And I didn't expect to see bared shoulders. It's a bit confrontational visually and a bit of a shock, but it's part of what I was working towards, if that makes sense. I see it as a progression towards being able to live the holy life unfettered by gender issues that have been put on us that were not there in the time of the Buddha. If I understand correctly, I have been told that this whole buttoned up and long sleeved look came from that a British woman who brought the 10 precept status to Sri Lanka from Burma. So she was in Sri Lanka. She was a British woman, became Buddhist to her family's horror, went to Burma, became a 10 preceptor, came back and put on these robes with a high collar and long sleeves, and that became the look and the expectation. Where in modern times I've been told, I don't know how modern now, but anyway, since my ordination, I've been told, of course we have to wear, the long sleeve shirt so that people can tell that we're female, not male. Like it's, the most shocking, terrible thing in the world if we might be mistaken on the road for the other gender. My God, that would be just terrible. But my call got dropped at some point somehow, so I don't know if someone mentioned already, but jackets are not allowed in the Vinaya. You want to do Vinaya, don't do jackets. I call it a blouse, like that's going to give me some kind of leeway. Thank you.
And Sangamitha, you were going to say something, I think. We were talking about the importance of role models, but feel free to add anything to the conversation.
Yes. Yes, when I first came in contact with Buddhism, that was in the 1980s, in 1985, and it was with Tibetan teachers. And in that world that I encountered there was no female teacher that just did not exist. I mean, there are, I know today, I know there are some nuns also in the Tibetan tradition and teachers, but in my scope of experience, that did not exist. And that is, I would say, the reason why it didn't occur to me when I was young to ordain and to become a nun. That just did not, that possibility was not existent for me. And only much later, when I also had Buddhist friends who practiced in the Theravada tradition, I saw, oh, people are actually doing this. And in that early experience, monks were always Tibetans, native Tibetans, and always male. Nothing else existed in my world of experience. And that was just a big limitation as I see it now. And only much later, I saw that there are actually other things in the world that do exist and that are just as authentic in their practice. And these people who are not native Tibetans and males and are just doing a great job and practicing very well. So that was a very new perspective for me. And when I first encountered the Therigatha, that too took me quite a while to understand really the value of what that means and how extraordinary they are, in fact. That they have been preserved for such a long time, and they are in fact the only corpus of literature of such a size and such an importance that have been preserved that have been authored by women and preserved until today. So that is actually something very extraordinary. But in my life, it took a long time until I really got that. So it is important to have such role models. So maybe I would be ordained today. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Sangamitha. I think one of the things that happens when we talk about women in any field, but particularly women in spirituality, is it seems that we kind of create a separate bookshelf just for women. And it's called Women in Buddhism. And then we sequester these great women from the rest of the literature. We create a special category all of its own. And we kind of say things like the importance of role models for women. And I understand from the conversation we've just had, especially what Venerable Munisura said and what some of you also shared, how important it is to have these role models for women. At the same time, why aren't we talking about how important it is to have role models that are women for everyone? What can men learn from these poems? What are these women telling men? And I mean, of course, also more broadly, but I think there's probably something in these poems that men can learn. And I wonder if, Vimalanyani, if you have anything you'd like to say about that.
That's a tricky question. I wasn't at all prepared for a question like that. Sometimes I feel actually quite a bit uncomfortable to, put people into categories like these are men, so they only can read these kind of texts, and we are women, so we read those kind of texts and we practice in this way. Because I feel like what the Therigatha are actually telling us is that gender doesn't matter. So the path is very similar. It's actually the same for everybody. When we look at the poems and nuns go to other nuns and they ask them to teach them about the Dhamma, and then we see what those nuns are teaching. They're teaching exactly the same thing that monks are also teaching. Like they mention the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the 4 elements, and so on. It's like the Dhamma that they're teaching is exactly the same. So the Dhamma is timeless and the Dhamma is ungendered. So, like, what can men learn from these poems? Exactly the same thing that women can learn from those poems, and that non-binary people can learn from those poems, and that ungendered people can learn from those poems. Like, it's just an inspiration for everybody, and everybody can strengthen their faith in Buddhism, and just get some positive energy for their practice on the path. So yeah, I think this is just such an important collection of verses for everybody to get inspired and to make progress on the path to liberation. And that's why those poems were spoken in the first place. That's why those nuns made those poems.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. One of the things that I noticed as a man reading the poems is that sometimes when the Bhikkhunis were alone in the forest and Mara approached them, they would say, "Who is this that approaches me? Is this a rapist?" And one of the things that I learned as a monk, as a man reading those poems, is that the situation has still maybe not really changed, and that women can still feel threatened on the streets. We see the Me Too movement, things like that. Did any of the other guests want to add to that? What can men learn from these poems?
I do, yes, actually. I'd like men, including monks, especially elder monks, to take from the Therigatha is that this is what happens when women are fully supported, fully funded, when women have access to the kind of material support needed. Then you get arhats. This actually can happen. It's not that gender is a barrier, but access is really a barrier. If you're not seeing women like this around you nowadays, well, maybe there's a reason. I remember when I was in college at Chapel Hill, and the scales in the women's weight room, in the women's locker room were broken. So I just went right into the men's locker room going, I'm going to step on some scales. These haven't been working in a while. And I was shocked to see this luxury of mansion of a locker room when the women's was cramped and just nothing to it. It was just terrible. And that was the difference in the investment in their sports program. And the men were really just, flourishing in their sports. But where, you get back what you've invested in. And, when I went forth, donations were made to the monastery in the name of this and that person who went forth. And the monastery would hold on to that money for whatever their special needs might have been. And I was one time a question had come up, and I was told to look through the donations, all the bookkeeping. So I was looking through it, and I was astonished to see that the donations when I went forth were 1/3 of the donation, or less than 1/3 of the donations of each of 3 young men who had gone forth in a previous year. So people had given about 10 times total in donations. I was the only one who went forth that year. In a previous year, 3 young men had gone forth, and each of them had received 3 times more donations in their names than I had, by about the same size crowd. And so I was just kind of jaw dropped. Oh, this is what I've gotten into. I see. And it really is like that. We keep saying that, the challenges today are pretty much the same for women as in the Therigatha. I haven't seen a single thing in the Therigatha about lack of housing. Nowhere to put your head. And meanwhile, what has happened with all of Ayya Khema's monasteries? She founded monasteries. Where are they now? In the hands of men. And there are women who are homeless who would possibly make good use of those monasteries. I mean, nuns, Bhikkhunis, who are wandering around trying to find a place to put their heads, literally, German ones. And there's a layman who has taken over one of those Ayya Khema founded monasteries. What's up with that? So while there are homeless Bhikkhunis from Germany wandering around in the world, there is an Ayya Khema founded monastery that is held by a layman, former monk. Like what are people willing to do for gender parity? When people have money to give, they'll give 9/10 of it to a male monk temple, and they'll give 1/10 of it to a female center, if at all. I literally have seen women interested in going forth who kind of were repelled at the realization of how impoverished a condition they were going to head into. And we're sort of blaming the nuns, like, why are you like that? And yet they themselves had given large amounts of donations over the years to the male monks and nothing to the female monks. So it's a blind spot. Thanks. That's my rant.
Thank you, Venerable, for that very sobering reminder. And Ayya Munisara, would you like to say something? Oh, you got to turn your mic off.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you, Bante, for bringing up that point, because actually I did have it in my mind when I spoke earlier, and I just sort of forgot to say it. But it's true. It is actually I think a whole area of discourse that's forgotten whenever people talk about Bhikkhuni ordination. Less so now that it's more established, but even 12 years ago when I became a nun, it was still much more still considered a controversial issue or a controversial move to take Bhikkhuni ordination, especially in Thailand. And but the discourse is very much about how this is something for women, that having fully ordained monastics or having that path open is something for women. So women will have this opportunity and it'll be good for women. But yeah, it's not so much emphasized at all, that aspect that it's good for everybody, like you say, and it's good for men. And what is it that men can gain from having Bhikkhuni teachers, especially enlightened Bhikkhuni teachers or enlightened female teachers? And that's actually, I feel like, a really important missing piece in the whole conversation. And what I found actually living in Thailand at a Bhikkhuni monastery was that a lot of times it was the laymen who came up raving, at the teacher and being all like, oh, wow, the way you teach Dhamma is so good, etc., etc. And that they found, maybe not necessarily because she was a woman, but maybe just the way that she explained Dhamma, worked for them. it allowed, this other human being who may not have had that chance if she weren't supported, to take monastic life, to develop into a teacher and to be able to offer these teachings to the whole public, male and female. So just for that. But I do think that there is a special, we are different, men and women. I mean, let's not like try to make this all like, oh yes, we're all human. Yes, it's true the Dhamma is genderless, but our experiences in this world are different if we're men and women. And so the way that we will express the Dhamma, or the way we will have grown in the Dhamma due to our experiences, will have a gendered element to it. And that's something that can offer a different perspective and a different voice to the explication of the Dhamma. So that's something that, I'd be curious to know. I haven't watched your panel, the panel you mentioned about the monks discussing the Therigatha, what it is that male readers get from it. Is there a different voice from reading the Therigatha? And what is that difference? But I certainly feel that for myself, listening to teachings from male teachers and female teachers, it is different. There is something different I gain from the way women teachers express it, that I think offers a missing, or it's like the kind of approach you have to Dhamma. There's many angles to it, and so the more well-rounded you can have your taking in of the Dhamma, the more well-rounded you're going to be as a practitioner. So it's really important to have that well-rounded opportunity or expression of the Dhamma available to everybody. And so that's something that I don't think we shelve the Therigatha in the Women in Buddhism section in our library. I'm the librarian. We shelve it in the ancient text category. We have the Therigatha and we have the Therigatha. They're next to each other. And so yes, it's for everybody, and hopefully that it doesn't become some kind of like you say special bookshelf kind of book, because it is, as one of somebody else mentioned, timeless. Yes.
I was very impressed, actually. I was really impressed seeing so many of the people who subscribed to the Therigatha Festival list and who are commenting and interacting and supporting the festival were men. Actually, there was a whole heap of men who were really right behind the festival and who were very down with listening to these poems and hearing women talking about them. And I was thinking to myself, actually, throughout the festival, how fortunate I was to be editing the videos. I was learning so much the whole time, and it really made me smile a lot, because I realized how little I know and how fortunate I was to have such good friends in the holy life who could teach me about the Dhamma. So it was something that I got out of it, and I think probably it's just being willing to learn. I'm just conscious of time. I did want to get on to some other issues of translation, but I think Ayya Yeshe, you had something you wanted to mention.
Sorry, I know I've said a lot, but Ayya Sudama brought up a really good point. And I mean, I've had men say they enjoy my teachings, the ones who aren't threatened by feminism, obviously, because they find women have a embodied take on emotions and a lot of emotional intelligence, and that they feel safe with women. They won't be ridiculed for expressing sensitivity or vulnerability in a way that they might not feel safe so safe to open up in more male dominated spaces. But also I think there's this issue of the shadow side of why people are so threatened with full ordination of women. And I think part of that is that nuns represent this radical archetype which is free of the traditional roles for females, which part of that is a certain women's bodies being controlled by men, child rearing, and women's unpaid emotional labor. And I think that's why a lot of people find full ordination so threatening, because it's an independent woman who's not controlled as much by men, who is not fulfilling the traditional role set down of wife and mother and carer. And even monasteries benefit a lot from having nuns that are kind of half lay people, half monastic, in terms of their cooking, in terms of their counseling, in terms of their cleaning. You know, in fact, a lot of monasteries, all of the, you know, a lot of the labor is done by women, you know, in terms of cooking and cleaning and volunteering, and who's going to feed the monks, you know, and it's always men's needs. And even, you know, when someone comments, what about modesty for the monks? How could a nun bare her shoulder? You know, it's always for the men, you know, as if women are, don't have agency. And I think that's why we need to dig up this shadow side and look at it, unpack it, and then put it to rest forever, so that both men and women are no longer tortured by a culture of dominance and oppressive gender roles, and both men and women can reach their full awakening, and we can be aware, well, this is my patriarchal conditioning in terms of me expecting a woman to give me care or to listen to me, or to, you know, how dare a woman be assertive? How dare a woman be sure of herself and not seek my permission? You know, there's so many issues around why we find independent nuns, full ordination, frightening, and and women having an unfettered access to the Dharma, why we find that frightening. So it's good to look at those issues around women's voices, you know, and to overcome that shadow side. You know, you can only overcome it when you bring it into the light. So thank you.
Thank you. And yes, very good points. Getting towards the end of our discussion, I did want to ask, I know that listening to your talks, that quite a few of you are translators as well, that you have worked on the texts or other texts, you have familiarity with the Pali and also other languages. I know several of you read your own translations of the texts. And so I just wanted to open up to some of our panelists this idea of translation and how important it is to have accurate translations, and perhaps maybe contrasting it with more freer versions of these texts, and what kind of place does accurate translation have? What kind of place might more free, more perhaps loose translations have, or loose versions have? And is there a place for both? Is there no place for either, or place for only one of these kind of forms? Maybe Sangamitha, you've been quiet for a while. Perhaps you'd like to tell us about translation. I know you've been translating lately.
Well, okay, I am translating into German. I'm translating actually from Bhante Sujato's English translations, informed by the Pali, but I would not be able to translate directly from the Pali. So I very much benefit from that work that has been already done, and the translations Bhante Sujato made are they are very accurate, but at the same time they use a language that is accessible and does not sound so complicated in itself as many of the older German translations, for example, do. And that, this is actually the reason that inspired me to make new translations in German, because the existing translations are a bit hard to access for some people. but on the other hand, looser translations do certainly have their place. The more, I won't say literal, but the more translations that are closer to the text, they are important in order to transmit the text to future generations, which is really something important. And looser translations may have a role in inspiring, bringing new perspectives to these ancient texts, the perspectives of the author, who interprets them in their own way, and all that has its place, just as, for example, artwork of other sort also has its place. When I see Venerable Yodha's Dhamma Doodles, for example, they are also a way of translating Buddhist text into some sort of language, or a visual language, and that is very inspiring for many people. So, well, both have their important role to play, I would say.
Thank you, Sangamitha. Very balanced. Thank you so much. Yes. Do any of the other participants want to chime in on that point? No, very good. Well, I look forward to seeing some more translations from those good translators out there. And thank you for the work that you're doing in bringing these texts to the new audiences who want to read them in their native languages. So we're getting towards the end of our chat together. Is there anything that any of the participants would like to share or comment on that they haven't yet been able to? Ayya Yeshe is ready to go. You can always rely upon your Ayya Yeshe.
Well,
I think Ayya Soma has been trying for a couple of minutes.
So we'll let Ayya Soma go first, and we'll get back to you, Ayya Yeshe.
it's all right. Ayya Yeshe can go first. No, I just wanted to say something about the earlier point about men relating to the Therigatha, or just women in general. So running a gender inclusive monastery, it's kind of funny because we try to make gender not a problem, but it's actually most of the time not a problem, but sometimes a big problem. And one of the biggest problems that personally I have encountered is not necessarily with actually kind of like the most extremist sort of very conservative, quote unquote, for lack of better words, practitioners, because normally those type of practitioners are not really interested in what we're doing, or not, you know, not be following either physically or online whatever offerings Ampli Cloud is giving. But actually, like the biggest sort of problems that I've encountered is more from quote unquote liberal practitioners, whether they are in robes or not in robes. And it's very much that kind of patronizing sort of attitude towards women, that even though perhaps they're supportive of our going forth and us as practitioners, there's kind of always that sense of that, oh, it's so cute that like this woman is trying to meditate, or it's so cute that she's trying to run, you know, like a monastery. It's so cute that she's trying to translate. Oh, so cute. But there's not like that kind of respect, or that even, you know, doing the work on one's mind of actually understanding what, where are these biases coming from, and why do I have this conceit of superiority towards female practitioners? And this is regardless, by the way, of if it's with other monastics or vasas. It can be also with, you know, laymen, who are not ordained at all, they will still kind of sometimes relate with that sense of superiority due to a physical attribute. It would be really weird if like I felt that I was superior to people just because I had brown eyes. And this is kind of how I always sort of related to, you know, my body up until monastic life. So connected to what I was saying earlier. And I was, as a lay person, I had the privilege to work in a field where the fashion editorial field that apparently is very non-binary and gender neutral. So that particular sort of bubble where I navigated most of my adult life, I had the privilege not to encounter these sort of relationships with others. So this is very new, has been very new to me. And I was shocked at the very beginning. I thought, what is the problem with this person? Why is he talking to me in this way? Is this person crazy? And I thought it was an individual thing until I realized that they were actually relating to me due to the bumps that I have on my body, due to genitals. And that at a certain point created a sense of inferiority in my mind, a conceit of inferiority, because of the outer world saying, you are X, Y, and Z, you are, or treating me in a very diminished way. And I never had that until Buddhism. Do you see what I mean? Which is why actually I considered disrobing, because at a certain point I thought that this form wasn't beneficial for my going forward, for my mental health, for liberation, but also just for like mental sanity, for, you know, like I was like, this instead of removing suffering is creating craziness. So I think it's very important for anyone who is practicing and has that identity of being liberal or supportive to women or whatever it is that, you know, I'm pretty sure anyone here that is present today during this talk most likely doesn't have very strong conservative quote unquote views and is probably supportive to female monastics. But I encourage each one of them, whether they identify as male or female or non-binary, to really do the work, investigate where is this coming from. And reading, for example, the Bhikkhuni Samyutta and the Bhikkhu Samyutta. The Bhikkhuni Samyutta, it's like, so all these incredible, you know, arhats that are exemplifying the awakened mind, and the Bhikkhu Samyutta, where it's actually very less impressive. So we can see how, you know, this sort of gendered idea that one is superior to the other is in our mind, but we really need to become aware of the bias rather than just throwing it out the window, perhaps that is pretending that it's not there. And these texts, I feel like, are extremely important to do that. It's also very important to have translations of these texts by people that have different bodies and different experiences. I only have 3 poems left in my personal translation of the Therigatha from Pali to English, and then I'm going to do Pali to Italian. And actually, I was extremely surprised to see how a lot of the translations currently present are inaccurate, or they haven't investigated too much the nuances of the experience of different monastics. Now, I'm not saying that my translation is superior, absolutely not. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what really made me reflect was, wow, all this time I was reading these texts thinking that these were the actual exact words, either of the Buddha or the enlightened women or the enlightened men. But in reality, actually, a lot of these words are translated from the commentaries. So it's not actually the straight up translation of the text, but it's actually whatever the commentary says is then rendered in that way, which, I mean, it really makes me excited to translate because it gives me purpose, but at the same time, so yeah, a recollection of what the Buddha encourages us to do. Don't believe in it just because you read it in a book. So not to trust too much what we're reading, but rather doing the work, investigating the mind. How does this match with the Dhamma as a system for liberation as a whole? So that's all I wanted to share.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I look forward to reading your translations. Very good. And Ayya Yeshe.
Okay, so women's rights are human rights. Human rights are women's rights. We all came into the world through a woman. Women are the gateway of life. I'm speaking as a cisgendered woman, of course. And as long as gender constructs cause women to die in childbirth that's not properly, neonatal care is not properly funded, as long as, you know, women do 60% of the world's work and own 10% of the world's land, and as long as women aren't equally represented in parliaments and in religion, as long as little girls look up and see a wall full of enlightened men and pray to be reborn as a man, gender will matter. You may not think gender matters in your own life, but that's a sign of privilege. As long as gender is imposed on you from the outside, gender matters. So, you know, it's a good idea to aspire to go beyond gender and you know, to not have that as an obstacle. But for a lot of people in the world, especially women in developing countries, gender is still a huge issue. A lot of the world's unpaid work is still done by women. A lot of women are still praying to be reborn as men. You know, I've literally been told to pray to be reborn as a man, and it's still going on. You know, we still have all these women disrobing because they don't have anywhere to live, because they don't have as much support, because they're not regarded with as much respect, because anyone who dares to speak out is seen as a traitor. You know, and we absolutely need to acknowledge the fact that we still don't have equality, and that, you know, if you really believe in the goodness and potential of everybody to awaken, we need to, and if we're committed to being good human beings and living a compassionate life, we need to remove the obstacles for half the population to access the teachings, for their voices to be heard, and for them to be able to pursue the path of awakening in an unfettered way, in an with no obstacles. Yeah, thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for sharing. Before we wrap up tonight, I'd like to invite the co-organiser of the festival, Ayya Vimalanyani, to say a few words to help us wrap up.
Yes, thank you so much, Bhante Akaliko. And yeah, when I look back over the last 2 weeks, I think we had like this amazing festival. I'm really very happy the way it turned out. So many people chimed in, so many people helped us out, people gave us technical support, people contributed, people, you know, made their own videos and sent us their videos to share on the channel and to participate. And so many communities from all over the world participated and held their own events. We had people from Asia, from Europe, from the US, from Australia, from all over the world, and so many people joined in, and it was really wonderful to see how everybody internationally came together to help us out. And even people who didn't do their own events, they helped us with the publicity, they helped us in so many ways. So I feel like really this, I was the organizer together with Bhante Akaliko, but so many other people also came together to make this happen. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, especially to the panelists who are here, especially to the people who joined Finding Sanctuary, Ayya Yeshe, Ayya Munisara, Ayya Soma, and Anagarika Sabamita, and also Ayya Sudama, who is here tonight, this morning, and who did the interview with me and who provided so many valuable insights. It was really such a pleasure, and also such an opportunity for the Bhikkhuni Sangha to connect worldwide, because sometimes we can feel very alone. Sometimes we live, you know, on our own, there's no other Bhikkhuni there. And then when we can reach out and do projects together and just have talks together and have an opportunity also to connect again, then that alone is already extremely valuable, I think, and also to share our stories and to tell people what it's like to be a Bhikkhuni in the 21st century. And not everything is perfect. And I think it's also good to acknowledge that and to yeah, have a platform to share our stories. And I want to also give a special thank you to Bhante Akaliko, who has done amazing work, especially behind the scenes. He's edited all the videos. He put in so many hours, even during his own retreat time, to help us out with this. So definitely we couldn't have done it without him. So huge thank you, Bhante, for helping us. And also to all the volunteers, to Ben, to Damit from Dhammanet. So too many people to actually mention, but so many people helped us. So I'm really feeling very privileged, very grateful to everybody who has joined us. Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm sure you could have done it without me, but it was my pleasure to help out. And so thank you for thanking everyone, because that's a wonderful job to do. There's just a few comments I'd like to read from the YouTube channel. So Theresia says, shall humanity in 2,500 years have the opportunity to read poems written by Buddhist nuns today? So I think Theresia is hoping for some poetry to come out of this. I guess in 2,500 years in the future, they might be watching old TikToks of Bhikkhunis giving 15-second talks, perhaps. And so perhaps there's an opportunity for some future direction. I think, Ayya Vimalanyani, you actually have a project coming up, which some of the viewers might be interested in hearing about. Would you like to talk about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you again. I have a new project to announce. So over the last few weeks, there was so much support for our Therigatha Festival and so much interest also in the ancient theories. So I have decided to do an online course called The Foremost Theories of Old. And in that course, we are going to talk about Buddhist texts. And we all know that Buddhist texts focus heavily on the male Sangha. But we can still see glimpses of the lives of the early Bhikkhunis in those texts. For example, in the Pali tradition, there's a list of 13 outstanding foremost Bhikkhunis, and we have a few of their suttas, and obviously we have their poem collection, the Therigatha. But also in the texts of other early schools of Buddhism, the Chinese texts, the Tibetan texts, Sanskrit, and some other languages, they also preserve their own lists. And in those traditions, there are lists of up to 51 foremost Bhikkhunis, and with their own suttas and with their own supplementary materials. And beyond those early texts, we also have later materials, apadanas, commentaries, and so on. So in the course, the Foremost Theories of Old, what we are going to do is we are going to look at all this material, and we are going to see the development of those, the stories of those early theories from the early layers of text to the later material, and to see how those stories evolve, how people related to those theories over the centuries. And also we can see, because we are going to incorporate material from different early schools of Buddhism, from different languages, we can see how those the images of those women diverged over time, and also in different regions, in different cultures, and also how that shapes the roles of women in Buddhism up until the present day. So that will also help us to understand modern attitudes towards nuns, towards female practitioners, and towards women in general, because all that relies on those early texts and is very much shaped by those texts of our tradition. And we're also going to include material from the Vinayas. So I'm actually doing translations of Bhikkhuni Vinaya, and it's actually those Vinaya texts are the texts that are often experienced as the most discriminatory, or the most strict, or the most difficult to reconcile, and also the texts that pose the most obstacles to the establishment of the modern Sangha, the re-establishment of the Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha, and the establishment of the Mudasavastivada Bhikkhuni Sangha. So by bringing this all together, sorry, I'm finished. Last sentence. By bringing this all together, yeah, we are going to see. We're going to look at the early nuns, but then translating that into the modern experience, how those old texts inform and shaped the roles of women up until the present day. So we're going to have 10 sessions, and going to be probably on the Buddhist Insight channel. We're probably going to start in 1 or 2 weeks. So yeah, please subscribe to the channels if you want to join, or if you want to be kept updated, send us an email at therigatha.festival@gmail.com, and we'll keep you updated about the course.
Okay, thank you, Venerable. Sorry, I thought you were going to start delivering the entire course. And there was just some interest. I think you can also probably add yourself to the mailing list on the Therigatha Festival webpage as well, if you want to receive updates. So one last mention, as 2 of our venerables have indicated in the chat, is that if you really want to support Bhikkhunis, you can donate to the Alliance for Bhikkhunis, which you can find simply by searching the Alliance for Bhikkhunis. And also, none of these people will ask, but I would like to encourage you to look at the biographies of our friends here tonight, and to go back and look at the Finding Sanctuary episodes on Dharmanet or on the Therigatha Festival YouTube. And you'll see that at the bottom of the description in each of the videos, the Venerables have mentioned the places where they're living, which you can donate to support. And so you can support these people here tonight who have spent their time learning the Dharma, practicing the Dharma, and sharing the Dharma with us all. And I would really encourage, if you can, to make a donation to these venerables and to these people here, so that they can continue to flourish in the Dhamma and help many other people in the future. And so I'd like to thank once again Ayya Vimalanyani for putting together this festival, and all the participants in this panel, all of the speakers and all of the viewers being here today and supporting this. And I wish you, does anyone want to do a wrap up? Maybe Ayya Sudama, maybe you'd like to do a dedication of merit.
All I can think of is just like a blessing chant. Okay. Well, I'd like to dedicate merits to all the women in robes before us, any of them who have not escaped samsara. May they be well, happy, and peaceful. May they escape samsara in this Buddha dispensation. And also dedicate to all of our loved ones who have passed in recent years. May they rejoice in this merit. And now I just give a quick blessing to all of you. Bhavatu samba mangalang rakhandu samba devata samba buddhanu bhavena sada sati bhavandute. Bhavatu samba mangalang rakhandu samba devata samba dhammanu bhavena sada sati bhavandute. Bhavatu samba mangalang rakhandu samba devata samba sanghanu bhavena sada sati Bhavandute. Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu, sadhu. That's where we'll finish up with this session. Thank you so much for being here. Take care. May you all be happy.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.